Welcome to Dispatch, the weekly show designed to keep you on track as you build and operate your layout. I'm Roy Smith, your dispatcher. Thank you for joining me tonight. Coming up on tonight's show, your layout photos, the question of the week, your comments, a commentary entitled Old Men and the Hobby, and a big shout out. First up, your layout photos. Many of you have posted photos of your layouts at the N-Scale Union Pacific Evanston Subdivision group on Facebook this week. From there, I have been able to bring the photos over here to Dispatch to share with you. Here they are now. Don't you just love to look at layout photos? I know I do. Well, here's what I want you to do. When this episode of Dispatch ends, I want you to go over to the group and post a photo of your layout there. I will put a link to the group down below that will take you there. You'll know you're in the right place when you see this photo of Echo Canyon of my layout. Then I will be able to share your photo in next week's edition of Dispatch. Be sure to come right back here after posting your photo because there's tons of stuff here on this channel that I want to share with you. Next up, the question of the week. In last week's episode of Dispatch, I posed the following question. How old are you? That may have seemed like a really strange question to ask, but I believe it's very relevant to the hobby. Some people say that model railroading is an old man's hobby. Well, is it really? I'm going to discuss that in a commentary later on in the show, but for now, let me say that a whole bunch of you responded to this question, how old are you? I've compiled your responses and would like to show you the results. Here they are now. This chart shows the age group breakdown of those of you who responded to the question. But what does the chart really tell us? Well, for one thing, it tells us that the difference among various age groups is noticeable, but not as dramatic as I had thought it would be. I thought there would be a much larger number of model railroaders aged 50 and older. But as you can see, there are lots of people aged 49 and younger participating in the hobby. The jump in the number of people over age 50 is often attributed to having more time in retirement, more space in the house now that the young'uns have moved out, and more disposable income now that the mortgage has been paid off. The chart also reveals that teenagers have much more interest in the hobby than I expected them to, although that interest does seem to drop off a bit in the 20s, probably as a result of career, family, and expenses such as mortgages. Now, I promised to reveal my age tonight, and I'm going to do that right now. I invited you to guess my age in last week's dispatch. Many of you underestimated my age, a few of you overestimated it, and several of you got it exactly right. Well, I say exactly right, but there is a small problem, and that problem is I had a birthday on Sunday. So prior to Sunday, I was 71, and a number of you guessed that correctly. Since Sunday, I'm 72 and a whole year older, and some of you guessed that age correctly. In any case, I fall into the 70 plus age group. I know I don't look a day over 80. I am sorry, there are no prizes if you guess my age correctly, but I will say this. I love the hobby of model railroading, and I plan to be involved in it for many years yet to come. Now, here's the question for next week. What one piece, just one piece of advice would you give to someone who is just starting out in the hobby? For example, would you advise him or her not to be in such a hurry and to plan carefully, and especially to take time to do good track work? Or might you say, just lay a little track to start with, just to get a train or two running while building the rest of your layout? Would you suggest that he or she hang out with friends in the hobby and online? Would you suggest that he or she start small and allow for future growth, rather than trying to build a vast basement empire from the get-go? What advice would you give? In thinking about it, try to remember back when you were getting started in the hobby. What was it that you wanted or needed to know back then? Remember, not everyone wants your advice, but nonetheless, the question for the coming week is, what advice would you like to give to someone just starting out in the hobby? Post your answers in the comments section down below. I will summarize them in next week's dispatch. And now, your comments. This past Saturday, I posted a layout update on this channel called Hiding Scenery Joints. In that layout update, I showed you how I am trying to conceal a visible joint on my layout where the removable part of White Mountain sits atop permanent scenery. Let's take a look at a clip from that episode. Today I'm taking some additional steps to hide that joint where White Mountain sits on top of permanent scenery. Stick around because that's happening right now. Hi, I'm Roy Smith. We model railroaders face a problem when creating removable scenery on top of permanent scenery. And that problem is we may be left with a joint or crack between the two. That's what's happened in case of White Mountain on my layout. You have seen me make White Mountain removable from the layout in previous videos. You'll recall that I did this so that I can access the helix under White Mountain more easily in order to fix catastrophic derailments that can occur in the helix and to clean the inside of the helix. I wanted the helix to be accessible from under the benchwork, from in front of the fascia, and now from above by making White Mountain removable. But making White Mountain removable left me with an unsightly and unrealistic joint in the scenery. Here's what it looks like. Many of you posted comments in response to that video. Here's what a couple of you had to say. Peter S. wrote, "The additional color and texture really adds to the overall effect and realism. It immediately makes me think of layered rocks from western Colorado, eastern Utah, and southern Wyoming." Well, thank you for your comment, Peter. I can't think of anything nicer than hearing you say that my work resembles the prototype I am modeling. I certainly want to capture the feel of that area. Gary Binder wrote, "The cut line is already much less obvious. It will be interesting to see what some talus and some more ground cover does." That's good to know, Gary, because my goal is to make the joint as invisible as I can by carving additional rock strata along the joint line, by applying paint pigments across the joint line to disguise it, and by applying ground covers and vegetation to help hide it. And Redbird Tony wrote, matching the colors of the terrain and highlighting the cuts to me would be difficult, but you made it look easy. Well, Tony, I hear you. If the new colors don't match the existing colors, then the joint would be more obvious, wouldn't it? Again, what I've tried to do is to paint right over the joint so that the joint is less obvious. To do this, I'm using the same Woodland Scenics earth tone pigments that I used to paint White Mountain way back in 2015 when I first built it. And I'm trying to apply them in a way that you can't tell the old pigments from the new pigments. I apply them and reapply them on top of each other until the old and the new pigments blend together. Thanks for your comment, Tony. One more thing. In Saturday's video, I couldn't remember who among you suggested that I carve additional rock fractures above and below the joint so that the joint would look just like another fracture in the rocks. Well, now I know who it was. It was Stephen Riley. In my layout update 2 weeks ago, Stephen suggested, why not try making the joint not the only dark line of strata? If you risk some other dark strata, the eye should be distracted. So it was Stephen's idea to carve those additional fracture lines above and below the joint, and that's what I did. Because I thought it was a great idea, and I just want to acknowledge that it was Stephen's idea to do this. Thanks for suggesting it, Stephen. Well, I would love to respond to all of your comments right here on Dispatch, but that would be impossible. I want you to know that I do read all of your comments, and I try to respond to as many of them as I can. Although sometimes I can't do that because there's so many of them. So let me just say how much I appreciate them. They have helped me to build a better layout. Your comments are a great example of how we share our knowledge and experience with each other in the hobby. Next up on tonight's program, a short commentary relating to our earlier survey of age groups. This commentary is entitled Old Men and the Hobby. Perhaps the older age groups predominate, as our chart suggested a few minutes ago. Perhaps a majority of model railroaders are older, retired men. After all, older men may have more time for the hobby in retirement. They may have more space now that the kids have moved out. And they may have more disposable income now that they no longer are burdened by mortgages and other such expenses. So yes, it's possible that a majority of model railroaders are older men. But does this mean that model railroading is just for old men? No, I think it doesn't mean that at all. If you had asked me if model railroading was just for old men 40 years ago when I was a young whippersnapper, I certainly would have said no, because I was a model railroader back then, even if I wasn't actively building and operating a layout at the time. Many of today's model railroaders have been interested in the hobby ever since childhood. I can tell you that I got my first Lionel train set at the age of 10, and that train set was the beginning of a lifelong passion for the hobby. And I can tell you that even when I was out of the hobby for 30 years as a result of my military career and other pursuits, in the back of my mind, I still thought of myself as a model railroader all along. Maybe I didn't have a layout, but I was still a model railroader. So no, anyone who has an interest in the hobby, male or female, of any age, can be a model railroader. I think that the hobby helps keep us young in spirit. It takes me back to age 10 with that Lionel train set. I dearly love the hobby. I hope that I never get too old for it. I want to conclude this commentary by showing you two memes that I have previously posted on Facebook. Here they are. Finally, tonight's big shout out. And tonight's big shout out goes to Tony Bowen and his incredible Rock Island Corn Country Rails division layout. Tony's layout is a multi-level N-scale basement-sized layout. He hosts operating sessions involving 10 or so operators. Tony has been working on scenery lately, and that's something which he really enjoys. He is effectively capturing the feeling of summer in eastern Iowa during the 1950s. Here's Tony now talking about the progress he has been making on his layout.
Hi, I'm Tony Bowen, and welcome to my Corn Country Rails. Well, the end of 2018 is upon us, and like last year, I always do kind of a recap of the layout. This year, a lot of progress was made on the lower deck when it came to scenery. I also spent some time on the upper deck, but the main focus was on the lower deck, getting scenery done. I also had the opportunity this past summer with my regular crew that we kind of finalized and got things together for our timetable for the railroad. That has come out very handy when we've had operating sessions. So I hope you'll enjoy just kind of a rail fan of the layout to kind of end the 2018.
Okay, you've met Tony and you've seen part of his layout. Now I want you to go over to his channel and check it out. I will put a link to it down below that will take you there. Be sure to subscribe while you're there and tell him Roy Smith sent you. Well, that just about concludes tonight's show. Remember, I upload 2 videos each week. Dispatch on Tuesday nights, in which I get to interact with you and which you are watching right now, and a layout update on Saturday mornings, in which I show you what I am doing on my layout. I hope to see you at both of these episodes each week. Of course, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that you get notified of new uploads. I don't want you to miss any of them. Thanks again for joining me tonight here on Dispatch. Until next time, happy railroading. I'm Roy Smith, and I will see you again very soon.